Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Historic Environmental Preservation Board of the City of Opa-locka. The date is Thursday, May 25th. The time now is 7:11. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Thank you. Board Member Van Meckel,
Here.
Board Member McIntyre,
Here.
Board Member Williams,
Present.
and for the record, thank you for the attendance. For the record, Board Member Suarez said he will be running late. Also, Board Member Brown, Board Member Smith, Board Member Ferguson, Board Member Nixon, and Chair Finn will not be in attendance tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to have a quick moment of silence, please. And please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any add-on items for tonight's agenda?
We do. We have one suggestion. Mr. Gay.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Due to the fact that we do not have quorum, we are basically looking at this as a workshop meeting. There are several items on here that are items that need to be presented to you for discussion purposes, to get input from the board, and give some direction as to how we would like to move forward with items coming up in the future. Also, it has been brought to our attention that right now we do not have a board chair for this particular meeting. And it has also been brought to our attention that we do not have a vice chair serving over this particular board on a permanent basis. I know that we've had board members volunteer to serve in those particular positions in previous meetings, but that is something that doesn't need to be addressed. Because we do not have quorum, it cannot be addressed tonight, but it is something that we definitely need to consider. Normally, these particular type of items as it relates to officerships should be addressed at the beginning of our calendar year, which is usually in January. So we will be presenting at the next meeting some policies and procedures as it relates to how this board needs to formally transition and take care of the business that needs to be addressed as it relates to being on the Historic Preservation Board. As you know, we are taking attendance and we are being very consistent to know who is coming to the meetings and who is not. That is going to take precedence as it relates to persons that will remain on the board going forth. So we are looking at trying to institute these new policies and procedures that will be presented to you as information, but it will be instituted within the ordinance by the city commission. And we anticipate that taking place through the summer months. So coming into the next fiscal year, we will have that information in place. So the boards will be operating more efficiently. If you have any questions, I'll address them at this time.
To staff through the chair or the acting chair. Thank you so much for that. I'd love to ask, is it possible that we reach out to those board members who have missed multiple meetings to just understand if they are still interested in serving? Because then I understand that what I'm hearing you say is that usually we would do that at the beginning of the calendar year. But I just wonder if it's possible to kind of just nudge them a little bit And if they are not interested in serving anymore, we can make sure that we're filling their seats with residents who are interested in being a part of this board.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Just for my own clarification, apologies, I do not know the answer to this already, but for other boards in the city of Opa-locka, is there already an attendance policy of some sort instituted in the ordinance?
Presently, there is not for any of the boards that I'm aware of, at least the boards that I'm responsible for. I know we're looking at instituting a very similar policies and procedures for our planning and zoning board, which will be forthcoming. So most likely, this particular board will be addressed with very similar language to basically make sure that we have enough people in place in order to move forward with the items. One of the things that we are also considering, because quorum seems to be a challenge overall, is to have alternate board members so that as situations occur that may be beyond board members' control, that we can at least have some alternate board members in place to serve in their stead for particular meetings or for whatever meetings that they will not be able to attend. So that is something that we're definitely considering. So we will be bringing forth this information at our next board meeting to let you formally see it and let you know that this is something that we're going to be presenting to the commission in order for them to adopt it as it relates to making a modification to the ordinance overall.
That's great.
Thank you for that. I echo Board Member Williams's request just to have a touch base with and hopefully realign with our existing board members, because I know that this is a passion point for all that are wanting to serve on this board. But of course, we need to conduct business as usual because we're presented with items that have consequence to homeowners that need answers and to proceed with their permits and such. So the follow-up question that I had was, I recall, I think it was end of last year, we did not have quorum, but there were items on the agenda that needed to be voted on. We couldn't, but it was still processed, if you will, to be put on the commission as a consent agenda. So is that essentially what it would look like in the event that in the next foreseeable 3 to 6 months, if we're in the same situation, that permits will bypass this board essentially and go through staff to approve?
The short answer is yes. There have been instances in the past, especially when this board was not active, where it was taken upon the commission to put in a opportunity where the city staff, along with a review through the city manager's office, were able to make an administrative proffer in order to move those particular items forward. That's something that we're going to be adding to our policies and procedures, and basically saying that, you know, if the board is not able to meet within a particular time period to make a decision or a recommendation that will be proffered before the city commission, then the item will automatically move forward. So that's something that we're going to be putting within those policies and procedures to basically make sure that we're able to address those particular items. And also, we are in the process of trying to identify those particular items that will fall under our certificate of appropriateness. We're trying to bifurcate the list where it can be items that will be more of a maintenance item and that may not necessarily have to come before the board, versus something that is a little bit more involved and does require some input from the board. So we are looking at making those particular modifications and creating 2 processes for our certificate of appropriateness. One being an administrative process that will be handled through the city manager's office. You as a board will be informed of what those particular processes are so that it will be provided to you as information. And for those items that, where people are making major changes or major improvements and going to a full restoration of their property, in most cases, those will be brought before you so that you would have an opportunity to provide your critical input.
Great. Board members, did you have any other comments? That was an extended add-on introduction, but just wanted to give you an opportunity to. We're good? All right. Thank you for that. We'll go ahead and move on to the approval of meeting minutes.
Due to the
Nope.
fact that we do not have.
Oh, we cannot.
We'll
That's
forego
right.
that at this time.
So we'll proceed on to public comments for agenda items only. For those in the public that would like to speak, any invited guests at this moment?
Good evening. My name is Maritza Hernandez, and I've been a Opa-locka, City of Opa-locka resident since 2011. I currently own the Harry Hurt home. He was a young single entrepreneur who served as an Opa-locka sales agent. He created the first commercial building, the Hurt Building, and was one of the first council members of the town of Opa-locka. I've been really interested in learning more about getting my home into the historic designation criteria and such. Pretty much, I feel like it is in pretty good condition, considering it's a home from 1926. And I have done everything in my power without realizing to preserve it as much as possible. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did we have any other public comments? No? Well, thank you very much for the introduction. That is very exciting to hear that we have a potential to add something to our registry, which would be the first in I think 3 decades, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a bit. So thank you for your interest.
I'd like to comment. It's wonderful to have someone who really cares for their property and wants to designate it. Sometimes that's a fight when it shouldn't be. You have the honor to be the caretaker of a historic place. And this board would like to do everything we can to help you honor that. And I'm sure if you need some help in filling out the paperwork for designation, all you have to do is ask.
Thank you, board member.
Very good.
All right. So we can proceed now to item 8, discussions and presentations.
Okay. For the sake of time, I would like to ask that the item that is number 6, if we could move that to the top of the agenda, if that would not be a problem, so that the staff member that we have here to make a presentation, they can do that, and then.
No objections.
Okay, thank you. With that being said, as everybody is always expressing their concerns as it relates to our historic city hall, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. The city has been trying for quite some time to restore that particular structure and bring it back into its days of glory. And we are embarking on doing that preservation process again. And we felt that it would be important to at least give you an update as to where we are within the process of the restoration of historic City Hall. So we have Miss Andalina Gross, who is our Director of Capital Improvement. She has been making remarkable strides in working with that particular project. And we are at the point in this time where we would like to give you one of the first presentations regarding that particular project. So as soon as Ms. Gross is ready, we will make that presentation at this time.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. So tonight we are going to be presenting the progress that we have done with Historic City Hall restoration. And okay. Can you see that? So we are calling on the restoration project 2022-2023. Actually, next slide, please. We started the restoration, we resumed restoration back in July last year after the directions from the city manager. We completed the plans with NC Harris. That was the company that was engaged from the beginning of the project back in 2015. So they have completed the plans now. We are 100%. And the bid went out back in February this year. It was awarded on April 26, 2023. And the notice to proceed for the renovation process, it was done last week. Was completed last week after a few weeks of contract agreement signing. Next slide, please. So at this moment, the facility is being cleaned and prepared for renovation. As you can see, the first picture on the top, it will be the status of the building as of Thursday last week. And the second picture is Friday last week in the evening. Next slide, please. So basically what you will be seeing is the progress that we have made so far. And you can see that the structure looks clean. We remove the excessive vegetation that was around the property. Next slide, please. Everything has been pressure cleaned inside out, including sidewalks. Next slide. And I think this is the most impactful picture because you can actually see the difference of what was before cleaning and after the cleaning. I was actually very surprised because I didn't know those steps have color. So, so next slide. And this is the electrical tower. Next. This is part of the courtyard. Next. And this is the inside of the building. It was also clean and pressure clean, and everything that was inside was removed. We removed 2 dumpsters of city jars last week.
Of city what?
Of trash,
Oh,
2
just
dumpsters, trash, city jars each. Next slide. So the picture on the left is the status that we found the stairs when we were doing the cleaning or the contractor was doing the cleaning. And the second picture on the right, it will be the condition after the clean was completed. Next slide. And the property is being fenced for construction purposes and to avoid anyone going into the property. We are doing this process slowly because some other stuff needs to happen before we can finish fencing the property. So the fencing will be completed like in I think another 2 weeks. Next slide. And finally, this is the rendering of how Historic City Hall is going to be looking at the end of this renovation. We are expecting the renovation to be completed by the fall this year. And we are trying to accomplish that goal. Any questions that you may have?
I think you might have just said this, but what's the timeline for completion?
Fall this year. We don't have an exact date to drain and some other stuff, but fall this year will be the completion.
So then that means, like, my next question was, do we have all of the funding required to complete the project? And it sounds like we do.
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the intended use of the building once it's been completed?
I don't have that information.
Okay, so we're not building it for anything at this point. We're just renovating it. And then I guess we'll decide what the building will be used for and then have to go back and do more renovations.
That's a management decision. I do not have that information.
Okay,
We are doing the renovation and the property can be used for events and other stuff, but I do not have that information. That will be a management decision.
and by management, you mean like the city
The
manager?
city manager and the commission decision.
Got it. And when do you envision that you all will work on the historic fire station? I know that's different, right? But I'm curious if that's on the roadmap.
So historic fire station is the next project. We're actually working on it.
Say that one more time.
Is the next project. We're actually working on it right now. We are working with the architectural firm to complete the plans for restoration. Historic fire station is not actually historic. It has never been registered as historic property. There are no records, not either in the city, county, or nationwide. But we are working on that. So by next year, we should have that completed.
That's wonderful. And do you have an intended use for the historic fire station?
As far as I know, it will be intended as a cafeteria or a coffee shop. So it will be transforming to that. So that can also bring public to the historic city hall.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions, board members? For Ms. Gross? I have a question because I did watch the presentation from McCary, the architect. Just out of curiosity, I understand that work had commenced, I believe it was 2014, and then it was suspended at some point. Here and now, this new contractor, Diamante, what is their biggest structural, I would say structural challenge at this point to complete the project? Beyond what we can visibly see needs to be addressed, like exterior cracks, but.
Well, one of the challenges of this project is the inside has to be completely done. Everything that was installed back in 2014, 2015 is not working anymore, including AC, elevators, and all that machinery. So yeah, however, the project in 2015 didn't stop due to payment.
Correct.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, I don't have any further questions. Anything else come to mind?
No.
Well, Ms. Gross, on behalf of the board that is here today, thank you so much for all the work you've put into our beloved landmark, to the city manager's office and all staff who've really committed to bringing this to the finish line. This is a really exciting moment, and I think seeing is believing, and the community will believe this when it's done in fall. So here he. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next discussion item.
Yes, well, the next discussion item, I believe, Vice Chair, would be your discussion item. As we all know, or as some of us should know, May is a Historic Preservation Month. And not too long ago, we did have a group of students from the University of Florida come and do some assessments and research on several of our properties within the city of Opa-locka. I know they're in the process of completing that particular report, and we will probably anticipate receiving that report sometime in June. But as a part of our agenda, there was a presentation that was done not too long ago, and we did include it within your package, you'll find that presentation on page 18. It was a PowerPoint presentation that was provided to basically show some of the areas of concerns and what the goals and objectives the students were seeking to achieve through their research. As we have been looking through a lot of the historical facts that and information that we have available to us now, you know, we're discovering things almost every day. As much as everybody wanted to believe the fire station was already designated historic, when we looked to find that information, we could not find anything. And come to find out that it has not been designated. So that is a process that needs to take place along with the restoration project that is taking place with that particular property right now. So we will be bringing that before you, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 months. Once we get the information from the report from the FIU students, we will probably dive in and probably have to have another detailed designation report done for the historic fireplace. I mean, the historic fire station. So that we can have that information available, take it through the process and have it designated to be either locally or potentially nationally on the national register. So that is something that we definitely look forward to bringing forward to you in hopefully by the end of the summer, early fall of this year. And also as a part of that particular exercise, we did receive the information relating to a pamphlet that was provided, I believe in the mid-80s, that basically showed where the historic properties were at that particular point in time. And I'm actually going into number 2, item number 2. We basically went through and cross-referenced a lot of that information and pretty much came to the conclusion that a lot of the properties that were identified on that pamphlet, they did cover at least the ones that were on the national register, but there were also approximately 40 additional properties that were on the list, on the pamphlet, but not necessarily recognized on the list of historic properties in the city of Opa-locka. And that's one of the things that we definitely wanted to look at, bringing that information current. And as a young lady who was speaking earlier about the Hurt House, that is one of the properties that is on the list of potential sites to be designated, especially as she looks to embark on a restoration process for that particular property. So if you would look, I believe it's on page 58. We do have a list of what we believe is all of the historic properties, the ones that are designated and the ones that are could potentially be designated as historic properties. Also, as we've been doing some of our research, one of the things that we came across is that out of the 32 properties that have been identified as designated properties in the city of Opa-locka, only 20 are on the national register. So there are 12 sites and 12 sites or 12 properties that are not on the national register, but they are on the local register for the city of Opa-locka. hopefully we can look at opportunities as we examine the condition of those particular properties, seeing how we can bring those forward to either bringing them onto the National Register if they should qualify. So that's another project that we have to undertake. So when you really look at it from a historic perspective, there's a lot more properties that could be considered as historic, either locally or nationally, that are within the city limits of the city of Opa-locka. So we definitely want to increase that number. We want to basically recognize many of the properties that are not on the register. And we also taking in consideration, as we move forward, that there may be some properties that the conditions of those properties have changed, but they still could fall under a category of being recognized as a contributing property toward the historic significance of the city of Opa-locka. So we're looking to bring that information forward to you and being able to categorize all of these properties to fall in one of those particular categories of historical significance. So that's another project that we will be moving forward on. If you have any questions, I'll take a pause right now to address them.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to mention that the National Register provides no protection for historic places. So I would urge you to first concentrate on getting local designation for those properties that you deem potentially eligible, and worry about National Register later. But it's the local designation that gives some protection. National Register gives nothing. Gives prestige, but you can knock it down without a whim.
Thank you for that.
So I noticed in the report that one of the recommendations from University of Florida is to include an honorary designation for some of these structures, because as we know, many of them are in different conditions. I'm curious if that is something that staff is considering.
When I use the terminology contributing, that's pretty much what we're looking at it as a contributing property, not necessarily having it designated as a historic property, but it is a property that is contributing to the historical fabric of the community overall.
Yeah. And then I'm curious, how do we then make sure that we continue to preserve those homes? Because part of the problem is that they don't get the benefits that are so well detailed in this report. As we know, when you're a historic property, there's tax breaks, there's all these other things that you get. So I'm curious if staff has thought of a strategy to make sure that we're also preserving these contributing properties.
That strategy we're still developing, because even from the opportunity where you can get, tax breaks and reductions, and that also plays into one of the things that we're looking at as it relates to the future grant opportunities for helping with properties that were in that historic period of time. We do have some of the criteria that we put together, and would like for you to analyze it as quickly as possible, because we would like to roll that whole grant application process out come the first of next month.
That's great.
So
the only other question, and I know we're going to talk about the grant program eventually, is there an opportunity for us to bring more historic properties to the fold through this grant program? So I know right now we're limiting the properties that can actually apply for it. And I know part of why we're doing this is because there's only a limited amount of funds, but I'd just be curious to know if there is something that we can do to use this as an opportunity to attract some of these other homeowners who don't have any historic designation, and we want them to.
that is something that we're still discussing, to kind of see how we can use that as using this application process for the grants is more like a marketing tool to just kind of raise the awareness of those particular property owners. One of the things we did note that as we were identifying some of the potential sites, we found that a significant number of them are actually owned by private corporations or investment groups. There's actually one property that I'm aware of that's supposed to be going to a foreclosure process right now. So I guess our primary objective right now is for those people who are homeowners and are in a position to go through a restoration process on their property, to try to work with them as quickly as possible. And then for the ones where the properties are still in a questionable ownership position, we're hoping that we will be able to convince some young developers or young entrepreneurs who want to work with a historic home, and you have quite a few people out there who are basically wanting to do restoration. And it's also for a financial gain. Flipping houses is something very popular that's occurring throughout the nation, and it's occurring here in this particular city as well. We would like to see where we can possibly put these properties from taking them from an investment standpoint and more so into a home ownership position for someone, maybe as a first-time home buyer, or some type of home ownership program, to be able to introduce them to these significant homes that could be hopefully preserved and saved.
Yeah, so I'd love to ask that as you find those opportunities, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with the board. I'm sure I know all of us are deeply passionate about the homes here and want to see them preserved, and probably have networks of people who are also interested and want to be homeowners here in Opa-locka. And so as those opportunities come about, please do let us know, because as we know, it's sometimes hard to find homes that are for sale or that might be about to be foreclosed on. So as you find them, I think you've got a network of people here who would love to help make sure we're getting the right people in the homes. I would also add that 2 points. So one, I know that we're going to go into budget season soon, if I'm not mistaken, here at the city, and would love to recommend that we push for an allocation so that we can continue doing this amazing work. If I'm not mistaken, I think this $100,000 grant program is through the ARPA funds, right?
Actually, no, the $100,000 is actually through the general fund.
That's wonderful.
So there is a obligation through the opera funds for the soon to be historic fire station project. So those funds were identified for that particular project. Yet and still, we do have those funds available. We want to be able to roll them out as quickly as possible. So when we come to the next fiscal year, which is fast approaching, we can either equal that amount or possibly increase that amount to address some of these other properties.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that, and hope we will continue to get $100,000 and more with every single year. And then I think the second thing, again, this is going to the grant program, and I know we're going to talk about that. I'm sure all of us are very excited to touch on that. I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to structure the grant awards. So maybe as opposed to it being just a flat $25,000 for everyone, maybe there is a certain amount that we would give for those historic structures, designated historic structures, and then maybe there's an amount that we give for those homes that we want to be designated historic. And again, that could be like that little incentive to get people to register. And again, you'll have one amount that's higher than the other, but it might be a good way to get a foot in the door.
Our initial conversation, and that's an excellent suggestion, but our initial conversation is that we wanted to at least address it based on need. And we are hoping that the property owner is willing to put some sweat equity or even some of their own personal funds into whatever project that they are seeking to do in order to improve the property overall.
And by need, you mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, the criteria
Mhm.
for the grant program is more so based on like the condition of the home, like that home really needs some work. And so those are going to be the 5 properties that we decide to invest in. Is that correct?
That's what we're considering, yes.
Okay. I'd still consider my tiered option, but I understand that this has been moving down the line. And so you guys have done amazing work. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do have a comment, and it was brought up at the last meeting, and I'm sorry that we don't have quorum to even vote on it, as a board. But there are 3 properties here on this updated May 2023 historic district that do not exist. Quite literally, they're either an empty lot or they're another building entirely. So I think it's important to note that as a result of University of Florida, coming through to do their historic assessment, which was comprehensive of thousands of buildings, not just the Mueller era, not just the 20s, but anything that meets a 50-year criteria, which is what the county is currently assessing at. They're already in pursuant of removing 3 of these properties at the state level through the Florida master file, so that we don't actually have 20 national register sites, we have 17. So I think that it's incumbent on the city of Opa-locka to have a designated properties inventory and a registry that is reflective of the buildings that we have today. Because essentially, if we have a grant program, either this cycle or a future one, that's doling out money to help with preservation and restoration efforts, it needs to reflect the buildings that are still there and still deserving of it. Additionally, again, I wish we could have a voting quorum tonight, because I don't see why we need to wait to vote on our historic or soon to be historic fire station to have that registration. So it would be nice in the near future to see a resolution passed to actually locally designate it. We don't need anyone besides our own body to be able to do something like that. So the first step, and I'm jumping ahead because it's on the agenda for tonight, about the removal of 1201 Scheherazade, but there's 2 other properties here that do not exist. In addition, I think we should seek immediate local designation for the fire station if in fact any of the cross-checking that's been done, even with the Florida master plan, does not reflect a historic registration status.
In response to that, we do have that particular national registration list, and I have gone through it and you are actually correct. The 3 properties that are no longer existing are the 1201, which is 1201, 1217 Scheherazade, which is the Hem store and apartments. We will be bringing a resolution in addition with a certificate of appropriateness to basically declassify that particular property as a historic property. So that will be coming forth, and that's one of the discussion items to just bring to your attention, that we will be bringing that particular item forward. The second one is the King Trunk Factory and Showroom, which was on 951 Superior Street. That property was a property that fell into disrepair for a number of years, and pretty much through demolition by neglect. It needed to be demolished. I believe the demolition took place in 2017, which was initiated through the property owner at that time. So that is another site. Matter of fact, the property has been demolished and it's been replaced by 2 single-family homes since that time. So that is another location that we're looking at. And then, of course, the Root Building, which was 111 Purvis Avenue, 103 Purvis Avenue. That is a property that fell into disrepair over a number of years. And then in 2017, during Hurricane Irma, one of the remaining walls basically gave way due to that particular hurricane. And then the property owner moved forth and did the demolition of that particular property. So those are definitely the three that we will be proffering before you at the next meeting to take action.
Thank you. Just to add to that, just because it's hugging, the pages are hugging one another, I'm flipping over to 59 where it says potential properties for historic designation. Are we talking locally or nationally? And the reason I ask that is because there are properties photographed here that have both national and local status, and I'm not sure why they're on this photographic list.
For the ones that are on this particular list, these do not have any status at all.
Because I can say 1141 Jan Avenue does have a local status. That's the Haslip House. And I also know that the Wheeler House, which was Opa-locka's second mayor at 1036 Dunad, should have that as well.
Okay,
Of course, there's countless others that do not, but this is not a complete list.
right.
So I appreciate the visuals. I think it's great, but it's not, this does not cross-check to the list that you guys work off from the building and permits perspective. 706 Shahar, that's a national register and a local register as well. Those are three just off the top of my list that I see here. Oh, 921 Superior, I believe has both local and national as well.
No, it does not.
It definitely has a national.
Yes. Okay.
So that's what I'm just saying. It
we'll
would be
double check
nice to
that.
get clarification on what this section is in terms of historic designation, because to Board Member McIntyre's point, the national does nothing to protect the home. It's an honorary status and more so to do with the authentic appearance of the building, whereas local, contributing or not, if it's designated, the community, the city, and the homeowner saw value in giving it a local protected status to help prevent demolition.
Okay. Well, we will go through and double check those to make sure, but definitely for the ones that do qualify, at least for the local designation, we would look at moving forward with making that designation take place.
Great. I also want to make a comment too, just to give an accurate number. I did a little bit of my own assessment here. We have 55 properties that go from 1926 to approximately 1930. 34 of them are owner occupied according to the tax roll. So it's a pretty substantial amount. I can't say of that 34 how much are locally, just in regards to bringing it back to criteria for a grant, how many have that local versus national or both status. But at least that's kind of a good number to work with in terms of our historic inventory overall, seeking the local, potential future ones, and kind of assessing who would be on the receiving end of a grant if the criteria really mandates that they're owner occupied. Board members, did you have any comments for these 2 to 3 to 4 discussion items that we kind of conflated into one large discussion?
Yeah, it just, like, one of the things that I'm thinking about as we have this discussion, I'm so glad today is actually a workshop. Although we have a lot of items on here to discuss, I would love it if we would plan a workshop just to talk about our priorities. I think as we talk, I hear us talking about so many different pieces, and oftentimes it is related to specific things that are happening. But I think we've got a really active board who's passionate about these topics. And so I would love for us to take a step back and really set some priorities in terms of, are we restoring, are we preserving? How do we make sure that some of the properties that exist right now are not being destroyed? And so would love for us to consider hosting a workshop on that. And then separate and apart from that, I would say that there's a lot of discussion on the city commission these days about I would say environmental and beautification. And as I look at our charge here as a part of this board, environmental issues is a piece of it. And so I would love it if we would consider maybe having a workshop on that so that we can also figure out what our priorities are related to it. Because the city is moving forward with a lot of things related to tree planting, et cetera. And that definitely falls under the purview of this board. So would love it if we are also having conversations about that and also getting reports from staff that they're working on those issues.
Yes, the city has been embarking on grant opportunities to green up our city, to increase the tree canopy overall. As a matter of fact, we are going to be applying for a grant application next week to deal with opportunities to increase the amount of trees within the city of Opa-locka. So we're definitely moving toward that. Once that application has been submitted, we can provide you with the information regarding that application. Of course, when you're planting new trees, they have to be native trees to basically be consistent with the climate. And at the same time, we are looking at it from the standpoint of whether there are opportunities to remove invasive trees and replace them with native trees. We can do that as well.
Thank you for that. I'd still love to recommend that we have a workshop. And I'm curious, do you know what grant you all are applying for?
It's the U.S. Forestry Grant.
That's awesome.
Yes.
I have
The
a-
Urban Forest, U.S. Urban Forestry Grant.
Thank you.
I have a dream of using that little fire station building on the grounds of City Hall as an urban forestry center, where there would be an urban forester who would not only administer the program citywide, but would conduct a training school for young people to learn how to be landscapers and how to properly plant trees so that you provide job opportunities as well as tree planting all over the city. And I think there's a lot of funding available for that if you just go to the right place. I think it could be a terrific program and a wonderful use of that little building.
I second that idea.
It's an excellent suggestion. We will proffer it forward to the city
May
manager's
I?
office.
You said the fire station, correct?
I'm not, that little building is on the grounds of the city hall.
Yes, that's the fire station.
Okay, I'm just notating it. Thank you.
Because there is another structure on that property as well, which is the old human resource building. And I believe that particular property, that structure is being
But you could both restore the building and make it into a, a very important center for
Mhm.
trees.
and I think they're going to be looking at doing something more parks and recreation oriented, which can be an aspect of trees and forestry to do that as well. So we'll see how we can integrate that component into the overall.
Another aside about trees, I'm involved with the Royal Poinciana Fiesta that's taking place next month. And if the city is interested, I could probably arrange for some Poinciana trees to be planted in the city as part of our celebration. Not this year, but next June.
Amazing.
That would be great, especially now since we're in the season where Royal Poincianas are blossoming and they look really nice.
I second that, Board Member McIntyre, and it should be noted that one of the original newspaper clippings from 1926, they had about 5 or 7 species that they led with to beautify Opa-locka when it was nothing but sand and pine trees, and Royal Poincianas were one of them. So I think it would be definitely in keeping with historically what they envisioned.
And it is the county's official tree.
Very good. So noted. As we move on within the agenda, we are looking at doing an update to the color palette, the historic color palette. And I apologize that within your document, some of the colors did not come through clearly. We do have a established color palette for the city. There have been several discussions about the how to bring that particular palette up to date. This particular color palette, I believe, was introduced in 2002 or 2003, around that time period. And if you know anything about colors, colors is just like fashion. It constantly changes. Some of it is dated and some of it becomes outdated, and then it comes back around again. And what we've heard from the public is that our colors, as they are described on the palette right now, are pretty much outdated. The manufacturer doesn't make those particular colors anymore. So we have to have some type of a substitute color to rule on. I just went through an exercise with this recently, personally. Even when it comes to historic properties, the color palettes have changed over the years. So the city, it will be having a workshop to deal specifically with the color palette for all residential properties in the city of Opa-locka. This workshop is scheduled to take place on June 21st. And it will probably be in the evening time on a Wednesday, 6 p.m. And we will have just an overall discussion. The sample palette that says historic on page 99, that's just a sample that I picked up from Sherwin-Williams when I had to repaint one of my own personal properties. And they specified that it had to be from a historic listing thus far. So that was like the most current colors. Of course, different brands have different variations of those particular colors as well. So we will be having that overall discussion, and I do invite the board members to come and be a part of that particular exercise.
You said that was June 21st?
Yes, June 21st.
Has there been a discussion about designating, not requiring historic homeowners to have it, but to have a separate section that really is tailored to the colors that would have been from this era as suggestive, like obviously part of the larger color code that's being developed, but perhaps there being like a historic section kind of similar to what you presented here, but a little more curated? Because I know that there's, just to add to that, just in terms of how my mind is thinking, I know that at commission meetings and business owners have raised concerns about colors available to them through our existing code that do not allow them to have a striking color, whatever that might be, even if it's a monochromatic one. So I know that that's what's kind of helped to prompt this discussion. So there's the colors for commercial. Now we're talking colors for residential.
We're
I'd
actually
be interested to know how they coincide.
If I could just respond to you.
Yeah.
We're actually going to have two workshops. One workshop is dealing specifically with residential, and the other workshop is dealing with concerns for the commercial and industrial properties. So we're going to treat it as two separate exercises overall. One looking at from the residential perspective and updating those particular color schemes for the residential properties, and then having a separate one where potentially there will be a separate color palette created for commercial and industrial properties.
Great. I still would suggest for there to be a suggested historic section. Obviously, it's one thing to have it kind of blended all together for residential broadly, But if historic homeowners, when they pull their permit and they get this code and they see essentially this is what is recommended, they can choose another color from the whole code, but it'd be nice to work together as a board to provide some recommendations and some inspiration for the architecture in that period.
We'll definitely take that in consideration, and hopefully you all will be available to be a part of that conversation on the 21st. Any other questions relating to the color palette? Since we've already gone over the presentation of Historic City Hall, we're going to skip to the Historic Preservation Residential Grant Assistance. Mr. Solomon Bancoli, who is our Economic Development Manager, has been working very closely on establishing the criteria in regards to this particular project that we desire to move forward with. And he has referenced a lot of different materials to create that criteria, as well as the application process. What we would like to get from you is feedback as it relates to whether the criteria is appropriate. Because we are looking to move this particular item forward as quick as possible. We would like to release the application process on June 1st with a June 30th deadline. So if you could give us your comments and feedback as it relates to the criteria and as far as the application process that we will be looking at. I know we've already gotten some input regarding this, but if there are any other ideals or concerns that you would like to express.
I do want to
regarding this.
add, just for the board members' awareness, page 56, well, I'm sorry, page 54 to 56 is what I developed alongside the University of Florida. And I deemed it and sent it to staff as suggested criteria to be sent to you as board members to review individually. As I understand, this is, I believe, the first time you're seeing it. So just for clarification, page 54, 55, and 56 is what I developed. And in conjunction to 119 and what it says, historic preservation grant criteria, I just wanted to make it clear what the first one was. I'm not exactly sure what and when this second part was developed, but as far as input, that's the input that he's referring to for these 3 pages. We obviously need to have a discussion about what we would like to see as a group.
I have a couple of comments. The present criteria calls for only the restoration of Moorish aspects. I think that is too narrow. It excludes other properties that are historic, but not necessarily of Moorish design. I think it would be appropriate for the Moorish to be your top priority. But I think there should be some flexibility so that if there are other styles of historic properties that need help, they will be eligible. And the other concern is to consider whether tenants can apply with homeowner permission. It's my understanding that about a little over 30% of properties are owner occupied. That means 60 or so are occupied by tenants. So that could exclude a lot of properties from being eligible for grants. So again, I would consider some flexibility and developing a program where tenants could apply with cooperation and consent of the owner.
Okay, thank you for letting me know about the second or first application. I wasn't reviewing that one, so all of the comments that I am going to give are in relation to the application on page 120. So I think we should ask a question about how the funds will be used to improve their home. Currently, that does not exist. I think somewhere in here, we have to define historic preservation, right? There's some homes that qualify, some homes that don't. Like that is something that like we understand here. And so I think somewhere in this application packet, we should define what that means so people know whether they are eligible or not. I have here as an aside, just silly idea, just asking them if they would be interested in a historic preservation plaque. I know that we talked about that before. So the purpose of that is obviously not in relation to determining whether they would get an award, but more so as we further our own plans here as a board, we would have a list, hopefully, of homeowners who potentially want a historic preservation plaque. I think it might be interesting to ask how long they've lived in the home, just for our own knowledge. I'm curious to know how many of these folks have been there for a while, and maybe we can actually get that information somewhere else. It might be helpful to ask what's the timeline for project completion so that we have an idea of what that looks like. I do think that we should include the scoring criteria. So it was helpful to hear staff mention that we are looking at this based on the need of the home, not the need of the person. And if that is the case, I think we should spell that out in the application so people understand how they will be judged. And also it just provides transparency in kind of the application process, to be very honest, and it's best practices oftentimes when you're doing a grant program. And then getting into the specific questions that are asked on this application, questions that I'm asking myself whether they are necessary or important are household size, total household income, your monthly rent mortgage payment, household composition. Those seem to be things that they're not going to be judged on. And so the question that I'm asking myself is, are those items really necessary in this grant application? And if not, I would highly recommend that we not include them. And so then, again, I just skimmed over the one on page 54 and 55. The questions that I asked myself are, I see you have where the grant is available to like a handful of like 12 or 13 properties, but then you list kind of some other ones. And what I don't understand is, how did you come to define that second list of properties? Like, what is that? What was that determining factor that had you include like the Harry Hurt house, Tucker house, however you pronounce it. And then lastly, I'm curious, the last sentence, why they would be required to remove any obstructions, foliage, or debris that blocks the structure's visibility. Like I understand that, but our purpose and goal here is to preserve historic structures, not necessarily to make them visible. And again, in this grant program. And so I am questioning to myself whether that is a true criteria that needs to be included. So I hope that's helpful.
I'll just respond because I know you went from the first kind of city produced versus the one that, and I just want to be clear again, this was as suggested criteria. The intent was for you guys to review this over a month ago, but nevertheless, it's important to revisit why we have $100,000 from our general fund as a line item for historic preservation. And I do appreciate, especially after having spent a lot of time with the University of Florida to do the entire assessment of Opa-locka to evaluate what our architectural dominance is, and it's not what we're so known for intrinsically with the Arabian Nights and Glen Curse and Moorish Revival. It's actually post-war ranch style, everything built from 45 and on. So that's what comprises the majority of our historic inventory. We have a few Mediterranean revival structures, et cetera. The intent for specifically the vision and intent and why it was voted on by commission last year was geared quite literally to bringing back the domes as just as a phrase to use. Essentially, our original structures, the oldest in the city, the identified Moorish revival landmarks, have over time lost a lot of their features, either it be a dome, a minaret, bands, et cetera. Even just the condition of the homes have deteriorated, parapets have been taken out. So $100,000 was envisioned to try to kickstart an interest in that original architecture and then provide incentives to the homeowners to restore some of these features. Essentially, they would be getting money so that the city can play off of the fact that they are the Arabian Nights, the dream of Araby that is so often known to the world. So just in regards to your question of the second list that's here, those are the homes that do not have, if I understand correctly, it's page 55, right?
Yes.
Okay. Those are the homes that do not have current registration status, local registration, but have been identified as some of the original structures with the names of the original homeowners associated to them. And again, this was as a suggestion to kind of start with a framework. It was intended to be kind of a phase one rollout for historic preservation efforts overall, but really geared to and incentivizing the idea of the domes for turning, regardless if it's a dome that you're trying to resurface on your home, even if it's just to address exterior structural essentialities for that part.
Yeah. So I'm obviously asking for a friend who lives at 1200 Jan Avenue. I'd be curious why, like, so again, I think about like my home, right? And so it didn't originally have a dome, but you've done such amazing work. And so we know that my home was built before like 1930. I think you figured out like 1926 or something like that. So kind of early on in the process. So like the question I'm asking myself is like, why wouldn't my home be on here? Although like, we don't know who the original homeowner is. I don't at least, but like, help me understand again, that deciding factor.
So on the record, the revelation that I provided Board Member Williams about her homeowner, all of that information about the date came after this was provided and was intended to be sent to all of you. So essentially, again, the criteria as defined here, because going back to your point of the importance of creating strategy and putting objectives behind our efforts as a board, I thought that that was essential and critical actually for this pilot program, because it's a pilot. We've never done this before. It's a historic moment. It's great, but we need to define our mission and our goals for this program. And again, it was always intended for this time frame. So essentially, had you been able to see this before, we could have made amendments to it, assuming that it was adopted in any fashion. As far as what's produced on 119, we don't even know what staff's position is on whether or not it needs to be a registered landmark, or if it can just be within this time frame. You know, those the inventory varies depending on the criteria and the parameters that you're setting forth for, as you stated from the beginning, a very limited amount of money. We all know in owning any of these properties, I know staff can attest to this as well, that as soon as you make one opening in your house, you're probably going to have to address 2, 3, 4 other things that come as a result of you just wanting to do something to restore the original appearance of your house. You open up a window, the roof starts to collapse. You need the money to make up for that. And I know this from personal experience. So I know that we all want this to happen, but it is so important that we come to a consensus. Staff agrees to what we have to say in terms of how this, essentially who starts with receiving it and what's the magic number that we're hoping based on the 100,000, very much aware of the fact that we don't know who the applicants are going to be, what they're asking to have done to their home. And depending on how many we may or may not get apply, there might be extra money left over to be able to open up to another property owner that wants to do something more to their property. Is that even possible?
So thank you so much for that. I think overall, I see where these two different applications can work, because I think what you've done is you've spent a lot of time building in intentionality behind like the purpose of the program. And then I think the application that's on 119 really gets down to brass tacks. Like, these are the things that you need. Like, we need to know your name and we need to know, I don't know, your address. And so I think there's some room for the two to be combined. I think, again, the one thing that I'm going to press on is us being clear about who can apply and who can't, and how we are making that decision, because I think that is where a lot of residents can get tripped up, right? Like, I think I live in a historic home, but like, it is not historic based on like actual registration. And so I think as much as we can be clear about that as possible in this application will, I think, be better received by our residents and really help them along, because sometimes, as you guys know, residents managing through grant programs, it's not always the easiest. And so we should try to make that as clear as possible. So thank you for your work on this. I think it's great.
If I may provide some clarity on some things, and we do have some work to basically merge these two items together to make it cohesive for everyone. Our general focus overall was to identify the original Moorish homes that were built between 1920 to 1935. That is really the time period that we were focused on. We weren't really looking into the post-World War II time period. To be quite honest with you, there's throughout South Florida, there's a considerable amount of post-World War II residences that, I don't think that that's necessarily the focus for Opa-locka, because Opa-locka has pretty much established itself as a community based off of the Moorish architecture. It's in our emblem. It's in a lot of the documentation that we put out. We make references to the Arabian Nights and, the books that are associated with it. So that's always been our primary focus, that those particular residential properties, along with the few commercial ones that still remain, that those properties would be the focal point, and is more focused on the Moorish revival architecture. Not to say that the others are not historic, but just saying that that's the time period that's probably of the most significance for the history in the city of Opa-locka. So just to let you know where staff's thought processes are in relationship to that. As I said before, we are looking to try to roll this out, very aggressively. The manager wants to put these monies out on the street as soon as possible, so that we can at least begin to establish a track record. So when the budget season comes around again for next year, and we can say, okay, out of the 100,000 we were able to put out onto the streets, 50%, 70%, hopefully 100%, and that we've already established that there is a need, and we're seeking to repeat this. Not everybody's going to get funded on the first round. Not everybody's going to get funded, hopefully, as we introduce this and bring it on and moving it forward. Just in conversations that I've had with, staff with Miami-Dade County, we're the only municipality that's attempting to do this. They're not aware of any other municipality that is trying to help provide funding specifically to help out property owners of historic properties. At least from a municipality's perspective. There's always those other grant opportunities and grant sources, but as a municipality, I believe we're the only ones that's attempting this first and foremost. So as you had expressed, this is a pilot project, and we're looking to hopefully be somewhat successful in this first round, that we will continue and make it not just a pilot process for Opa-locka, but an example for other municipalities to look at as well.
I want to add to what he just said. This is accurate in terms of what cities can and cannot do. I will say that a lot of the structure of the criteria that I had presented was based off a pilot program that was actually conducted in a Black community, a historic Black community outside of St. Petersburg, as well as another one outside of St. Augustine, where they limited it to 5 recipients. They evaluated the intent of the homeowner to do certain improvements to their property. In those cases, they were deemed Florida vernacular architectural projects, not, a Moorish revival, but nevertheless, they started with 5. They evaluated each applicant's needs in a range, in this case, 10 to 25,000, something to that extent. And they also had to work with 3. They had essentially pre-qualified 3 contractors, which I know we don't really have the time for, but so that the city knew that the money was going to the extent and to the purpose it was intended for. That's why they pre-qualified 3 contractors. The homeowner selected one of the 3 they wanted to work with. And essentially that contractor would receive money directly from the municipality to conduct the work that they would on said property. So that's essentially how, the mission to the 5 properties will be awarded. And then there would be an evaluation that after the 5 selected, is there any money left of the 100,000 to open it up to a 6th or 7th applicant that may have come through that weren't awarded on the first pass. So that's how that came to be. And I want to make it clear that our time frame of focus in Opa-locka for Moorish revival is 1926 to 29. There is no documentation of anything after the year of 29 having been constructed in that aesthetic and in that style. And in fact, to add to that, as if it weren't already problematic, I'm sure Board Member McIntyre knows this, county records are not always accurate. Board Member Williams's house is recorded as 1930. We have a photograph of its existence in 1927. So I think it's important that we take all things into consideration, and what we have to work with here and now are 26 locally designated Moorish revival homes. And then the second list here is comprised of potential designees such as Mrs. Hernandez's Hurt House on 305 Dunad, and then some other ones that we have photographs of and a lot of documentation have direct linkage to the development of the city of Opa-locka, should that be of interest to, again, going back to the time frame that we're talking about. But then you have to ask the question, what are the improvements that you're going to do to some of those homes that we don't have photographs of, elevation drawings? And that's why I wanted to offer in this write-up about what we do have available, because essentially if someone wants to bring back a dome, did the house even have a dome? And if it didn't, if we're not sure, does this grant program go to support something like that? And how does it get done? There's architectural drawings that need to be done by a structural engineer or an architect. Then you need to have a contractor agree and understand and how to interpret those and put them up to code. It needs to be processed by the building and permits department, brought to the board, and then the money gets doled out. So I am very excited that this is deemed pilot, and I'm sure it will come to fruition. I bring all of this up as areas of concern as to how we go about vetting these projects and ensuring that what happened in St. Petersburg with one of their pilot programs doesn't happen, because what happened was, of the 5 that they awarded, one of them had their contractors steal the money and didn't complete the work. And how did they hold them accountable? So we need to make sure that since this is a generous allotment, all things considered, that we're making sure that there's accountability in all aspects of, the homeowner accepting it, applying for it, specifying exactly what it's going to be for. And those guidances need to follow preservation guidelines, which is why under criteria, generally speaking, any grant of historic nature, federally, state, or municipally, requires that there is some level of proposed renovation work must meet federal guidelines of the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. Essentially, that helps to provide the framework and the instructional manual of if you want new windows and your house is from 1926, you either need reference material to show exactly what you want to put there, or you have a general idea of what it would have been like in the 20s, which we have access to, and it's not cost prohibitive because that's what the grant is essentially paying for. So once we announce it and we define who can get it, I'm assuming you guys would send mailers out to the homeowners so that they're aware of this. Then how do we evaluate what it is that they're submitting to have done to their house? And if it's all just structural and you're not seeing visibly the impact of what the grant's intended to do, which is to restore essentially the exterior, that's kind of part of the criteria. I mean, there's a number of things that you can decide to do on your home to renovate, plumbing, et cetera, but we're really talking about the beautification aspect. It's the front curbside appeal of any of these properties. And if we're going to compromise as a board to be, I don't want to say strict, but a little more stringent on what the curbside looks like, true to Moorish revival, then there needs to be an evaluation process by this board and by staff.
Yeah, so I think that we need to make some room for people to so the funds not simply be for curbside appeal, but some of it be for the preservation of these homes, because some of these homes have not been updated in a really long time. And yes, we can give it the curbside appeal, we can put a minaret, we can put a dome, but the reality is that if a home has foundation issues, right, like that could be destroyed in no time. And so maybe there's some delineation that we do. I don't know, maybe it's like 10% can go to this, 25% can go to this, but I would highly recommend that we consider including just work that needs to be done to the home, because that will contribute to the long-term preservation of the space. I would also add, as you were speaking, Board Member Van Meckel, I am sure that staff is going to do this, but I think we need an agreement with both the award grantee as well as an agreement with the contractor that outlines like what is required. This is a legal instrument that both of them are required to adhere to. And if they don't, it gives the city the opportunity to revoke the funds, so that, to your point, we don't find ourselves in a situation where someone's stealing our money or someone's using the funds for something that they shouldn't. Can we allow them to make?
Sorry.
It's a workshop, so yeah.
Yeah, can we open it up for public discussion for those that might want to contribute?
If you all are in agreement, then yeah.
I am.
Likewise.
Good afternoon. My name is Mikhail Solomon. I own a historic home on Sherrar Avenue, 1011. I just wanted to perhaps make a recommendation to address what you're discussing about contractors potentially being malfeasant during the process of renovation or any construction of any home. I know there's a program like I think it's called the 230K program, where, you know, a contractor is in fact responsible for doing the work, but they only get paid once the funds have been or the work has been approved by whoever the grantor is. So it's usually the federal government. So maybe that's how you control the general contractor's performance, is that you make sure that they do the work to the standard that is required before they get paid, or maybe they only get a small percentage up front and they have to, you know, subsidize it themselves in order to get paid on the back end. That might be the way you control their performance. Yeah.
I think that's a really great point.
Thank you for that, Ms. Solomon. I do want to note that St. Augustine for their pilot program and another historic Black community, they issued 10% to the contractor to initiate the work, as that's usually a mandate from a contractor, some percent. And then that would be on the commencement of the work after, of course, the plans are approved. And then the final payment would be issued on completion and, most importantly, inspection. Because in owning one of these homes, I noticed inspections have passed and they should not have. So in this particular case, a final inspection is conducted to ensure that whatever the work that was done, that was drawn up, is actually what happened, and then they're paid in the year 2023.
Did you want to say something?
Of course. Thank you for asking, but you didn't need to. It's a public discussion.
Good evening. My name's Bruce Aaronhoff. So I'm listening to the conversation.
I'm sorry, I do apologize, but you do have to say your address on the
Of
record.
course. I live in Coral Gables.
No, you have to say the physical address, the physical, yeah, like the.
That's
number.
what I'm going to tell you. Yeah, I'm sorry. I live in Coral Gables, Florida, and I'm 2221 Country Club Prado.
Thank
okay.
you.
I'm here because I'm a colleague of Ms. McIntyre, but so my understanding is the focus of the plan where you have the funds of it being made available. There will be decisions about how many properties get used, but the idea was restoration on properties, and it would be, you were thinking about exterior restorations, but properties that were Moorish. And then that the focus then has to do with elements that make that property Moorish. But I'm not, maybe I'm overstepping my bounds, but I would recommend that original drawings be researched and found to the extent they exist. And if they don't, you can inspect the property and see if an element, the structure will usually give you indications if an element did exist and had been lost. But I would not, from my perspective, I would not recommend that somebody decide that they want to add a minaret or add a dome just because it's Moorish and they've got a property that falls into that period. One must not, in a historic building, add things that weren't original to the construction. You don't want to embellish something. You can have something that's Moorish that had some very simple elements, and protecting that and reconstructing it and preserving it is important. You know, maybe a minaret or a dome is more flashy, but there could be other elements. So I would not I would not recommend a faux element that wasn't there when it was built. You're changing the fabric of your population of properties then. Because you can have some that are very elegant and have all kinds of bells and whistles, but you can have one that's got simple Moorish elements, and that property deserves to be preserved that way. And when then you look at the entire complexion of everything that's part of that population within your community, you've got a range of what it was, and you're honoring what the original vision was of the people that were planning and developing. So I don't know whether that's an appropriate set of concerns, but I wouldn't rush to let somebody just add an element that they don't see on their property now just because it could look Moorish. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's important, to mention.
Sure, no overstepping, no need to apologize. I think it's actually a salient point that you brought up. For most of what we have on current registered historic properties, even the ones that, even if you consider this a a PR play to get buy-in to get new registered homes on the second list. We actually have the majority, I'd say over 80% of either the original elevation drawing, and in absence of that, we have a photograph. And addressing, again, quite literally curbside appeal and authenticity true to what the building was. We can also extrapolate for those that we have neither option. Other elements that they were very consistent about in the development of Opa-locka. So I think we have that at our disposal. Staff has a digital link of every single home's original elevation drawing that's already been photographed at their disposal. So in the event that it is determined by the board, by staff, that the criteria is registered historic status of a structure of the 26 that we have, we can cross-check the elevation drawing or the photograph. In Miss Hernandez's case for her potential registered but very historic Harry Hurt house, we do not have original elevation drawings of the house, but we have an explicitly clear photograph of it, which is even more rare to have than the elevation drawings, and quite a special thing for her as a homeowner to have as a keepsake. So again, we're lucky in that sense when we're refining the Moorish revival restoration talk at this point, and unfortunately, but fortunately, in the sense of us having a grant to back this up. Preservation in the sense of the four walls, yes, that's a key area of focus. That needs to be line item 1, because to board member Williams's point, you can't put a dome on top of a roof that's about to collapse. I think that's a very logical and like sensible thing to allow for some amount of money to be able to go to. But for all other elements, again, once we receive applications and once that criteria defines exactly and helps guide the homeowner as to what they can do with that potential money they can earn, then it's up to the staff to make the determination as to who receives the funds. And I assume, I guess that would be a follow-up question. I don't know if we've heard about, is it staff and the city and the manager's sole discretion as to who of the set amount receives the money? Is it coming back to the board? How does that process work?
As it stands right now, through the chair, we're basically looking at an administrative review process, depending on the scale of what type of work is going to be done. And then once those recommendations are determined, we will present that to the board.
And based on the timeline that you propose, so June 1st, this will be mailed out to homeowners, comes a day or two later. By the end of the month, they're supposed to submit all required documents pegged to the criteria that they've read about and agreed to, essentially. Essentially, what I'm trying to ask is, do we have this money for long enough to allow this to actually happen in 2023? Because if a contract, if by the time this board reviews, approves, it goes to consent agenda, and then the COA gets issued for a contractor to start, God willing, we are lucky enough to not have hurricanes this season. Essentially, do we have enough time to do this?
I'll put it from this perspective, because of the review periods and everything that are tied to this particular process. We'll probably will be meeting. It would be very close to get it done before it's September 30th. This is probably something that will roll over into the next fiscal year. And I'm just based on how the application process, how we anticipated coming back before the boards, and then having to take that information and present it to the commission for their final ratification, if that is a step that is necessary. You're probably looking at sometime in September for this to be actually approved and in order the funds to be distributed.
Does it really need to go to commission for approval?
That was going to be my question.
If it is something that deals with, if there's a certificate of appropriateness attached to it, yes. which I am anticipating that it would. Which is why we needed to bifurcate it to where if it's something more along the lines of a maintenance process versus a major improvement process.
I'm curious, is it possible to get like a blanket approval from the commission that gives staff or whomever the approval to move forward with the awarded grantees so that we don't have to bring every single one back to them because that'll slow down the process? Like, I wonder if there's like one blanket approval, they know that we're doing this grant process, that we don't have to take everyone back to them. Just a thought. I don't know.
It's something worthy of entertaining and proffering. Hopefully we can garner a majority of the board to agree to that.
Hopefully we have a board to agree to it. But yeah, I guess the timeline is of concern because we all know how long it takes for a permit and we all know how long it takes. Actually, first of all, I should note how long it takes just to find a contractor. And I can speak from my own experience. If it's a plumber, if it's a stucco guy, I have had the hardest time. I'm talking about 6 months worth to identify a contractor to reconstruct the dome on my Moorish home. 6 months. And that was just my independent pursuit. That was my independent research. Obviously, any homeowner is welcome to, assuming it's allowed for in this grant program, to choose their own contractor. But between a few grand that went into a structural drawing to allow for it to meet code, to then have to be met with a contractor that will execute those drawings, to then have to obviously go through any process, grant or not. It takes time. And I understand that the commission, if I'm not mistaken, is on hiatus in August. It's month of August, right?
Typically, yes.
Okay. Which is not ideal because then you run into the worst of hurricane season in September and October, and that inevitably delays everything. So my hope and my dream is to just see this through for the sole purpose of historic homeowners reaping this benefit. It's my personal recommendation. Obviously, we can't vote on it in this quorum, but I would love for the secondary list of known Moorish Revival Bernard Mueller designs to be included in this first pass as an incentive to starting to bolster and actually add to our local registry, because I think that that is a huge part of what can make this grant program not just appealing, but also help to restore and create relationships between the city and these historic homeowners. Again, that's my personal recommendation. I just think that this would be an incredible opportunity to say, hey, not only is this a pilot program coming out of the city of Opa-locka, but for the first time in 30 years, as a result of it, we enlisted 1 or 2 new properties. And those are huge wins, not just for the city, but for the homeowners and for those that are looking to have an example set of how to go about fostering preservation and restoration communities. Because to board member McIntyre's point, it's sometimes it can be a very difficult conversation to have. Either you're an elected official, whether you're a city staff member or an independent consultant trying to get the buy-in of a homeowner that's being told, you know, your home is significant, you should register. Oh, well, what does that mean? Some might be welcoming of it, others might be threatened by it. But the point here for all to know, even for those that are watching, is that there is a great benefit and a great honor to having a local designation. There are tax incentives associated with Miami-Dade County. There could even be one developed by this very board specific to the city of Opa-locka that we need to look at for 2024, going back to strategy. But I think from the onset, this is a wonderful opportunity in the next 3 years of our 100th anniversary to try to invite some of these newcomers into the fold, because some of them, by the way, used to be on our historic registry because you can see that there was a plaque on the front of their house that's missing. And somehow they're not on our list today as we see it. So that's just my personal and very thought out suggestion.
So I'd love to do a quick time check. We are 6 minutes till 9. And so I would, I guess I would love to figure out if we can wrap up this conversation. And part of that is, I hear staff loudly and clearly that you all want to be able to put something out on the street very soon. I didn't realize today was May 25th. And so getting this together in a matter of 5 or 6 days seems a lot, but I think if staff has the capacity to do so, like, I would like to say that the board, we are behind you. I think you've received a lot of feedback from us. And so the only thing that I would ask is it possible that before this is published, that you would share a near final version with the board via email so that we could take a look at and provide any feedback to you?
Absolutely.
Beautiful. But otherwise, I think we've given you tons of feedback.
And it's very well appreciated.
Board Member McIntyre, and I know we've spoken a lot. Did you want to add anything to close out this conversation?
I think we've covered a lot of things, and I think staff has got a lot of work to do. Sorry about that.
So much for the holiday weekend.
Oh, that's true. So even less time to get this thing out. Well, luckily, a lot of feedback's been provided, a lot of groundwork has been done. Our entire city reaps the benefit of an entire archive to cross-check and reference when it comes to restoration efforts. So that's a wonderful thing. And to Board Member Williams's point, whatever is decided upon and sent out, it'd be great to have it so that we know and can even help to promote it within the community. Although they're already supposed to receive it, we can really talk it up for those that, again, qualify based on the criteria.
Mr. Chair, I move for adjournment.
I second.
All right, this meeting is done, 8:57 PM. Thank you so much all for
Thank you.
attending.